Thomas Bennett had spent decades alone on the mountainside, and the rhythm of isolation had long ago woven itself into the fabric of his days. But that morning, the mountains no longer belonged to silence and snow. The sky buzzed with machines, and the old dirt road trembled under tires broader and heavier than anything the narrow mountain tracks were built to bear. His quiet cabin, once hidden among towering pines and low-hanging clouds, now stood exposed under a new kind of storm, one made of authority and secrets. The first signs had come with the helicopters, unmarked and ghost-gray against the dawn. They circled low, their searchlights probing the mist as if they expected the mountains themselves to surrender their mysteries. Then the SUVs appeared, winding up the treacherous road with the persistence of an invading army, kicking up dust and leaving deep ruts in the thawing ground. When they arrived, men stepped out with an energy that betrayed their outward appearance of civilian ease. They moved in tight formations, their heads on a constant swivel, speaking into radios clipped beneath the folds of plain jackets. Their boots, polished and standard issue, told Thomas more than any insignia could have. Within hours, his front yard, once a haven for elk and the occasional lost hiker, was transformed into a bristling forward base. Mobile labs were erected with the efficiency of long-practiced hands. Antennae sprouted like steel reeds, humming faintly against the mountain wind. Tents materialized, some filled with blinking consoles and humming servers, others stocked with cases of equipment labeled with cryptic codes. Thomas watched it all unfold from the stoop of his cabin, a chipped mug cooling in his hand, the old weather station creaking behind him like a ship caught in an unfamiliar tide. They came to him soon enough. A man with sharp eyes and a face withered more by decisions than by time introduced himself without offering a name. Thomas nodded and invited him inside. Around the battered kitchen table, Thomas spread out his life's work, maps painstakingly drawn by hand, notations written in tight, angular script along the margins. Details only a lifetime could capture, where the earth sometimes heaved after a heavy rain, where the rock changed color with the seasons, where forgotten tunnels still breathed a stale, unnatural air. The men listened, but their expressions betrayed little. They told him, in measured words, that the glow he had reported was no trick of atmosphere, no stray trickle of electromagnetic phenomena. It had coincided with anomalies detected by military satellites, patterns suggesting an artificial intelligence, an autonomous probe, operating beneath the mountains. Not natural. Not domestic. Foreign in a way that made every whisper of radio static seem suddenly suspect. Thomas was careful with his knowledge. He knew these mountains better than any device could. He spoke of abandoned mining shafts long since collapsed, of geothermal fissures so caustic they could strip the paint off a truck in minutes. He recalled places where even snow hesitated to fall, where the air itself felt wrong against the skin. He described them not as landmarks, but as living, breathing things, shifting, changing, hiding their own wounded places. One detail caught the attention of the officials more than others, the Black Cauldron. It was an old name for an older danger, a tangle of geothermal vents near the site of the mysterious glow. Invisible from the surface, the cauldron exhaled corrosive gases capable of disabling electronics and eating through steel in hours. Tourists never ventured near it, locals barely spoke its name. Thomas had only approached it once, and even then he'd retreated quickly, the hairs on his arms standing upright against a breath of unseen menace. The idea formed quietly, almost naturally, let the invader continue its path. Let it edge closer to the danger it could not understand. The men conferred among themselves, stepping outside to murmur beneath the heavy sky. Thomas remained at the table, his hands resting on the old thermos that had been his companion through decades of lonely winters. He did not feel pride or fear. Only a deep, resigned duty. The mountains had always needed protecting, not from hikers or storms, but from those who came thinking they could conquer what they did not respect. In the hours that followed, the plan unfolded with a precision that belied the quiet surroundings. Seismic sensors hidden along the ridges began transmitting data. Atmospheric readings shifted as the probe advanced, inching steadily toward the death trap Thomas had guided them to. Its signals, once rhythmic and certain, became erratic as it descended into the Black Cauldron's unseen grip. Thomas spent that night sitting by the weather station window, just as he had the night he first saw the strange glow. Outside, the wind howled low and mournful against the eaves. Occasionally, a murmur of voices crackled from radios carried by men in the field. He could picture it clearly even without being there, the drone, trapped like a wounded bird, its systems faltering one by one as the toxic air wormed its way inside delicate circuits. By dawn, the glow had faded. The mountain returned to its solemn self. They retrieved what remained of the probe, a skeletal husk of high technology, rendered useless by a force as old as the Earth itself. Scientists and engineers swarmed over it, gathering data, salvaging what could be salvaged, documenting what could not. The operation was swift, thorough, silent. By the end of the second day, the helicopters lifted off once more, the SUVs rumbled down the mountain, and the tents vanished like a dream that had never quite been real. Only Thomas remained. And the mountains. The station, unchanged to the casual eye, now bore subtle scars, flattened grass where the labs had stood, faint tracks pressed into the softening soil. On his porch, a new satellite dish gleamed incongruously against the battered wood. Inside, next to the old percolator, sat an expensive coffee machine, still wrapped in plastic. A folded letter lay beneath it, heavy with embossed seals, offering official gratitude for unofficial services rendered. Next to it, a secure phone blinked silently, a lifeline to a world that had, until now, remained distant and theoretical. Thomas poured himself a cup of the old coffee, ignoring the new machine for now. He sipped slowly, watching as mist curled and danced along the treetops below. The mountains whispered in their ancient voices, indifferent to human struggles, patient beyond comprehension. He knew nothing had truly changed. Not really. But as he sat there, the weight of his quiet vigil heavier than before, he understood that sometimes it was not armies or machines that protected a nation. Sometimes it was a single man, sitting alone in a wooden cabin, paying attention when no one else did. And that, he thought, was enough. The mountains wore their silence like a second skin after the operation, but Thomas knew the calm was not yet complete. Something lingered beneath the surface, something unfinished. The disabled probe, though crippled and silent, had not been the mountain's only secret. Signals still flickered occasionally across the instruments left behind, faint as the dying heartbeat of a distant star. Thomas spent his evenings at the weather station's worn oak table, maps unfurled before him, tracing invisible lines through the valley. Memory guided his pencil more than sight. He remembered places where the rocks seemed warmer even in winter, where the snow steamed instead of settling. He remembered old miners' tales, half-true stories of tunnels that sang on cold nights, vents that could cook a man alive in minutes. Places where nature itself rose up in quiet, unyielding defense. The Black Cauldron had claimed the first intruder. That much was certain. But there was unease among the officials who remained in whispered contact with him through the secure phone. They worried the first probe had not been alone. Thomas understood their fears. Foreign minds, unlike the mountain, did not rest easily after failure. They would try again, send another machine, perhaps smarter, perhaps slower, but no less determined. The question was no longer whether they would come back. It was how to ensure they never succeeded. He proposed a plan, a simple one, built not on confrontation but on patience. He explained how the geothermal fields around the Black Cauldron spread much wider underground than the satellite readings suggested. Natural gas pockets, unpredictable venting patterns, and sudden shifts in pressure created a labyrinth of hazards no machine could map in time to save itself. With careful manipulation, they could nudge any future invader toward the same doom as the first. The military men listened. Some of them doubted. Some wanted to intervene directly, to confront force with force. But Thomas's years in the mountains had taught him a hard truth: the mountain could not be commanded. It could only be understood, respected, and very rarely guided. In the end, they agreed. Using the new satellite feed installed atop his station, Thomas monitored the subtle changes in the environment. Seismic tremors too faint for human senses trembled through the ground. Shifts in magnetic fields twisted delicate instruments into confusion. He watched it all patiently, like a shepherd minding an unseen flock. And then, late one evening, just as the first stars pricked the deep velvet of the sky, it happened again. A signal. Subtler this time. Wiser. The new machine did not blaze brightly like its predecessor. It crawled carefully, testing, measuring. It stayed away from the obvious traps, hugging the cold, hard rock walls of forgotten mines and ancient fissures. But Thomas had mapped those too. He advised the team, through the silent line, on how to reshape the invisible battlefield. Temporary radio towers, disguised as natural ridges, created false echoes. Carefully timed emissions made safe paths seem unstable and unstable paths seem safe. The foreign machine, clever though it was, could only guess based on the information it received. And the information it received was a carefully orchestrated symphony of lies. Hour by hour, it crept closer to the cauldron's breath. Thomas sat through the night, a thin blanket across his knees, the old thermos steaming faintly at his side. He felt no triumph, only the grim weight of necessity. In another world, perhaps, he might have marveled at the technology now trying to outwit him. Perhaps he might have admired its patience, its cunning. But in this world, he had no room for admiration. Only the quiet, persistent duty to protect. At 4:17 a.m., the readings shifted sharply. The machine had committed. Thomas watched as the indicators flashed, pressure rising, electromagnetic fields distorting, temperatures spiking beyond safe thresholds. The foreign probe, confident in its chosen path, slipped directly into the embrace of the mountain's hidden wrath. There was no grand explosion, no dramatic collapse. Only the slow, inevitable failure of systems pushed past their limits. Metal corroded. Circuits burned. The air itself, saturated with invisible toxins, gnawed the machine down to a dead and useless carcass. By sunrise, the operation was complete. Another threat neutralized not with P***ns, but with patience, understanding, and the silent, terrible power of nature itself. The military team recovered what fragments they could. Little remained worth studying. Whatever secrets the foreign engineers had buried inside their device, the mountain had swallowed them whole. And once again, the temporary camp dissolved. Tents packed away. Antennae collapsed. Heavy boots stomped out campfires before driving away in caravans of dust and exhaust. Radios crackled a few last murmured farewells and went silent. Thomas remained, alone again atop his mountain, the new satellite feed his only link to the world below. He poured a cup of coffee, the old kind, thick and bitter, and sat on the creaking porch as the first real snow of winter began to fall. It came in slow, heavy flakes, blanketing the battered station and the scared earth around it, softening the scars left behind. The thermos rattled slightly against the wooden table as the wind picked up. Somewhere down in the valley, a deer barked sharply into the cold morning air. Thomas sat, the cup warming his hands, and listened. Not for the foreign machines. Not for the click of radios or the thrum of helicopters. He listened to the mountains, their breathing steady once again, their voices low and timeless, speaking only to those patient enough to hear. He thought of how easily all this could have gone unnoticed. How many others would have dismissed the first glow as a trick of the atmosphere, a glitch in equipment, a ghostly light better left unexplained? But not him. Because sometimes, he knew, the difference between vulnerability and strength wasn't armies, or missiles, or even technology. Sometimes, it was a single, stubborn man. A man who chose to see. A man who chose to act without being asked. And that, he thought, was enough. The storm of men and machines passed, but it left behind a silence thicker than any snowfall. Thomas Bennett woke on the third morning after the last departure to find the mountain washed clean again, the signs of invasion reduced to faint scars in the mud and crushed grass near the station's entrance. The winds had smoothed over tire tracks. The frost had sealed away footprints. The mountains, always patient, had already begged *N to forget. But Thomas had not. His small home, barely more than a cabin bolted onto a crumbling station, felt different now, as if the walls themselves carried the echoes of what had unfolded. Inside, among the familiar clutter, weather journals, spare parts, maps with curled edges, there were new artifacts: the polished satellite dish gleaming above the old shingled roof, the sleek black coffee machine humming softly on the counter, and a thin envelope resting in the center of the kitchen table. Thomas had left the envelope unopened for nearly a day. It sat there, untouched, as he went about his routine, checking the instruments, shoveling the light crust of snow from the steps, tapping gently on the barometer to verify its readings. But everywhere he moved, the envelope seemed to call out silently, a thin presence made heavier by the knowledge it carried. That evening, as the last blush of sun slipped behind the peaks, he finally sat down at the table, the thermos beside him, and opened it. Inside was a letter, heavy paper thick enough to resist the mountain damp, its heading marked by an embossed seal. The words were spare and formal, an official expression of gratitude, recognition of services rendered in defense of national security, an offer of continued, confidential collaboration as a regional mountain domain awareness consultant. Beneath the formalities, 2 items nestled: a sleek black emergency phone, blinking faintly as if breathing, and a thin, silver-plated coin pressed into soft velvet, stamped with a simple image of mountains beneath a vigilant eye. Thomas turned the coin over in his hand for a long time. It was cold and weighty, like the mountains themselves. He knew better than to think of it as payment. It was a token, a quiet acknowledgement from a world that usually forgot men like him existed. The secure phone came with no manual, no explanation beyond a simple instruction in the letter: if you see what others miss, let us know. Thomas placed the phone carefully in the drawer beside the weather station logs, where it would remain within easy reach, though he hoped he would never need to use it. In the following days, life settled into a rhythm not unlike before, but the edges were different now. Each morning, Thomas still rose before dawn to record the pressure and temperature, to track the subtle moods of the mountains. He still brewed his bitter coffee in the battered thermos, preferring it over the sleek machine left behind. He still walked the perimeter of the station, boots crunching through the crusted snow, his breath steaming in the cold air. But now, there was more. Once a week, at precisely the same time, a coded transmission pulsed briefly through the satellite dish, a series of numbers, a single encrypted check-in. It came and went like a ghost, a small reminder that somewhere beyond the horizon, he was not entirely forgotten. The locals, the few who even remembered the old weather station, noticed the change too. The delivery drivers who braved the narrow road once a month spoke in hushed tones about the new dish, the strange men in suits who had once been seen trudging through the snow, the extra supplies sometimes stacked near the back entrance without a name attached. But Thomas never spoke of it. When asked, he only smiled, thin and private, and said the station was getting a few upgrades after all these years. In the spring, when the ice began to retreat and the valleys filled with mist, a small plaque arrived in the mail: no return address. It was simple, unadorned. Just 5 words etched into brushed steel. Vigilance without witness changes everything. Thomas mounted it on the wall above the main console, just beside the old photograph of the station as it had looked in 1952, when his father had first served there. The words were not flashy, not grand. They sat there, steady and unblinking, a quiet creed for the work he did. Sometimes, he wondered if he would ever see another light in the sky, another uninvited visitor probing the ancient bones of the mountain. He knew it was possible. In a world racing ever faster toward automation and ambition, places like this, quiet, forgotten places, were tempting targets. Easy to overlook. Easy to exploit. But Thomas was not a man easily overlooked. Not anymore. He did not seek glory. He did not hunger for acknowledgement. He asked only for the simple right to watch, to notice, to understand. And when the time came, he would act again. Not with noise or force, but with the steady, invisible hand of someone who had spent a lifetime learning when to move, and when to wait. The mountains needed no speeches, no medals, no grand banners flying in their honor. They needed only a guardian, patient and sure, content to be invisible until the moment invisibility became a wee *P***N. Thomas Bennett, caretaker of weather and now of deeper, older things, leaned back in his chair as evening fell. The sky beyond the window burned in slow waves of crimson and violet. The thermos steamed beside him. The secure phone sat silent in its drawer. He had no doubts, no regrets. In a world obsessed with spectacle, he had chosen a different kind of power, the kind that whispered instead of shouted, the kind that watched instead of demanded. And somewhere beyond the mountains, in places he would never see, the ripples of that choice were already moving outward. Kindness without question was enough. So too, he thought, was vigilance without fame. The seasons turned quietly after that. Spring slid into summer, summer bowed to autumn, and the first flakes of another winter brushed the mountainsides like the opening strokes of an old, familiar painting. Time in the high country did not crash forward the way it did in cities. It unspooled gently, in long ribbons of wind and mist and distant thunder. For Thomas Bennett, the passage of time was measured not in months or years, but in quieter things, the slow expansion of a crack in the weather station's concrete steps, the return of a kestrel to its usual nesting perch on the radio tower, the way the creak of the floorboards beneath the south window grew slightly sharper each November. Life, it seemed, had returned to its steady rhythm. But if the outside world saw only a man tending a lonely station at the edge of nowhere, Thomas knew better. Beneath the quiet, something fundamental had shifted. He was no longer merely a recorder of the skies. Somewhere in the halls of decision-makers he would never meet, somewhere inside systems too vast and secretive for most to imagine, his name now existed, attached to a simple truth: some sentinels cannot be replaced. His work expanded slowly, invisibly. Through the secure phone, he would receive coded requests, subtle disturbances to monitor, shifts in patterns that satellites found suspicious but opaque. He answered with the precision and patience of a man who had lived more years in the company of clouds than of people. His reports were never verbose, never speculative. Only facts, carefully observed, delivered without fear or embellishment. He never left the mountain. There were no formal meetings, no briefings in steel rooms under fluorescent lights. No commendations delivered in heavy frames. Just the soft, steady expectation that he would notice what others could not. In the local town, rumors about Thomas grew stranger. Some said he was working for a private weather firm, others spun tales of government experiments in climate control. Occasionally, a hiker would pass through, glance uneasily at the shining satellite dish, and quicken their step. Thomas didn't mind. Let them think what they wanted. The truth was simpler, and far more complicated. Some days, he missed the old kind of loneliness, the pure solitude of a man forgotten by the world. Now there was a new weight, a deeper responsibility. The mountain trusted him. The government, in its own way, trusted him. And somewhere deep inside, he carried a trust that could never be named aloud, the understanding that his vigilance, his stubborn commitment to the silent spaces, mattered more than he would ever be told. Winter deepened, and with it came the kind of storms that seemed to erase the sky itself. Snow piled in drifts taller than the cabin windows. Winds howled like ancient creatures through the frozen canyons. During those nights, Thomas would sit by the stove, wrapped in the heavy wool blanket his mother had knitted half a century before, and listen as the storm battered the station. The satellite dish stood firm. The thermos never left his side. The plaque on the wall, cold metal catching the firelight, reminded him whenever doubt crept close, vigilance without witness changes everything. Sometimes, he imagined what might have happened if he had ignored the first strange light. If he had written it off as an anomaly, a trick of tired eyes, a phenomenon beyond his concern. The thought tightened his chest. One man watching a mountainside might seem insignificant. But sometimes it was the smallest, quietest acts that stopped 1,000 unseen disasters. The calls grew less frequent as winter thickened. The world, it seemed, had shifted its attention elsewhere, at least for a time. Thomas didn't mind. He had spent his life preparing for long silences. Still, once a month, he hiked to the ridge beyond the station, where the radio signals caught better, and checked for new messages. Most often there were none. Each time, he returned with the same quiet satisfaction, the knowledge that nothing, for now, required intervention. He never spoke about the day he had watched the foreign machine stumble into the black cauldron. He never told anyone about the second, subtler probe. Even when a retired journalist wandered through the town one spring afternoon, fishing for ghost stories, Thomas simply pointed him toward the old mining museum and wished him well. Some things were not meant for telling. They were meant for remembering. And for guarding. One morning, as the heavy snows began to retreat into dirty heaps at the base of the trees, Thomas found a small package left by the back door. No footsteps marked its arrival. No vehicle tracks marred the thawing earth. Inside the plain brown paper, a photograph, an aerial view of the Silver Ridge weather station, taken from high above, the early morning light casting long shadows across the roof. In the lower corner, written in a steady, official hand. "You are not unseen. Thank you." Thomas placed the photo in a simple frame and set it beside the plaque. He sat a while, watching the photograph catch the sunrise. For once, he allowed himself a thin smile. He thought of all the times the world had passed him by, the endless days when he believed no one noticed, no one cared. It had never been about recognition. It had been about the duty itself. The choice to remain steadfast when no applause was coming. To do what needed doing, because it was right, not because anyone was watching. Thomas lifted his thermos in a quiet toast to the window, to the mountains, to the silent sky beyond. Kindness without question was enough. So too was vigilance without witness. The world had always been balanced by the quiet deeds of ordinary people, those who asked nothing, expected nothing, and in doing so, changed everything. He had once feared becoming invisible. Now he understood, invisibility was sometimes the greatest strength of all. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying his silent oath back across the ridges, across the valleys, across the sleeping world he had sworn to guard. And Thomas Bennett, alone but never lonely, remained at his post. Unseen. Uncelebrated. Unbreakable.